Today I will be telling you the story of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah. Come join me. Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Heidi. I'm a Malaysian author, and today I will be telling you one of the most famous folk tales from Southeast Asia, and that is the story of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah. Now, back in episode 17, when I talked about the magical healing powers of fairy tales, I hinted that I would tell this story one day, and I'm really excited. The day has come. So sit back, relax, chill while I tell you the tale of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah. Once there was a man who was married to 2 wives. Each of these wives gave birth to a beautiful daughter. The daughter of the first wife was called Bawang Putih, which means garlic, and she was very kind and beautiful and lovely. And the second wife, her daughter was called Bawang Merah or shallot, and she was a little bit more cruel and lazy. Now, the first wife was a kind, gentle, lovely woman, much loved by her husband. And the second wife, she was a bit evil. She was a bit cruel, and all she could think about was how to get rid of the first wife. She was worried about her daughter's future, and she wanted to get rid of her rival. One day, second wife saw first wife leaning over the river as she washed her clothes. It had rained the night before and the current was fast. So the second wife thought, this is my chance to get rid of my rival. So the evil woman crept up to first wife and pushed her in. First wife was swept away by the current and she drowned. The second wife pretended to faint and she grieved for days. Bawang Putih was, of course, distraught at the loss of her mother, but she stayed strong for her father and she vowed that she would take care of her family because she knew that that was what her mother would have wanted her to do. A few weeks passed, and little by little, bit by bit, things began to change around the household because now second wife had become the first wife. The second wife was now head of the house, and she got rid of all the servants and ordered Bawang Putih to take over the chores. This is how you can repay me for taking care of you, she said to Bawang Putih. Bawang Putih didn't mind, of course. She was happy to take care of her new family. The stepmother took away all of Bawang Putih's beautiful dresses and clothes and her jewelry, and she told Bawang Putih to sleep in the shed outside in the garden. She treated Bawang Putih like a servant. Now the father was grieving over the loss of his first wife, and he didn't really notice what was happening to Bawang Putih. He buried himself in his work, and Bawang Putih was now at the mercy of her cruel stepmother and stepsister. Bawang Putih did as she was told. She woke up at the crack of dawn to make breakfast for the family. She collected water from the well. She washed the clothes, cleaned the house. She did everything without complaining. One day, as she was feeding the fish in the pond near her house, she thought she heard a familiar song. She looked around, but no one was there. And then she realized that the singing was coming from the pond. She looked inside the pond and she saw a beautiful fish who was singing the song that her mother used to sing to her. Bawang Putih looked at the fish and she was surprised when the fish spoke to her. The fish said, "Do not be sad, Bawang Putih. I will always be here for you. I will take care of you forever." Bawang Putih suddenly realized that her mother had turned into this magical fish. She was overjoyed, and from that day onwards she would often visit the pond to talk to her mother, to spend time with her mother. She was so happy to be with her mother again. And the magical fish had powers that could help Bawang Putih with her chores, so the magical fish would often help Bawang Putih with her chores. Bawang Putih was so happy that she began to walk around with a little spring in her step. The color came back into her cheeks. She was looking beautiful, and the stepmother was angry because she didn't want Bawang Putih to be happy. She didn't want Bawang Putih to look beautiful. So she began to spy on Bawang Putih, and one day she followed Bawang Putih to the pond to see Bawang Putih chatting happily with the fish. The stepmother then decided to do something quite evil. She could see that the fish was a source of comfort to Bawang Putih. So the stepmother creeped up to the pond, called out to the fish, and when the fish came up, she grabbed the fish, she killed it, she cut cut it up into pieces, fried it in a pan, and served it to Bawang Putih. So Bawang Putih did not know that this fish was her friend, and Bawang Putih ate the fish because she was hungry. She wasn't being fed properly at home. Now that night, Bawang Putih had a dream that her mother came to her, and the mother told her everything that had happened, how the stepmother caught her and killed her and fed her to Bawang Putih. Bawang Putih was so upset that she was crying in her dream. Her mother said, "Do not be sad, Bawang Putih. Find my bones. It's buried somewhere underneath the house. And then take them away, bury them in the garden, and something wonderful will happen." In the morning, Bawang Putih woke up in tears, but she remembered what her mother had said. So she went outside, she looked under the house, and she saw all the fish bones scattered under there. So she wondered how she was supposed to gather up all these fish bones, when suddenly she saw some ants crawling towards her. The ants began to gather all the fish bones and put them in a pile for Bawang Putih. So these ants were helping Bawang Putih. Bawang Putih gathered up the bones and she picked a beautiful spot in her garden and she buried the bones in the garden. And then something wonderful happened. The next day, a tiny shoot appeared, and the day after that, it grew into a plant. Bawang Putih was so excited that she began to take care of this plant. She watered it, she fed it, she made sure it had enough sunlight until the plant grew into a magnificent, beautiful tree. And then one day, out of nowhere, this tree produced a beautiful golden swing. As soon as Bawang Putih sat on the swing began to sway and a song filled the air. Bawang Putih was so happy that she began to sing the song her mother had taught her. Her beautiful lilting voice was carried through the forest and attracted the attention of a passing prince who was out hunting with his men. Mesmerized by the beautiful voice, the prince followed the sound of Bawang Putih's voice to her house. But when he arrived, the stepmother quickly locked Bawang Putih in the room. The stepmother lied to the prince. She said that her own daughter, Bawang Merah, was the one who was singing the beautiful song. The prince looked at Bawang Merah and she looked pleasant enough. She was quite beautiful, but he wanted proof that she was the one who was singing. So he asked her to sing the song. Bawang Merah cleared her throat and began to sing, but she wasn't much of a singer, and what came out of her lips were just screeches and yelps. The prince had to cover his ears. "This is not the girl who was singing. Is there anyone else here?" asked the prince, feeling a bit angry. No, there's no one else here," said the stepmother, because she did not want the prince to discover Bawang Putih. Just then, the swing began to sway even though there was no wind. A voice called out from the tree, "There is someone. She's trapped in the house. Call her out, call her out." The prince ordered the stepmother to bring out Bawang Putih, and when he saw how lovely she was, he knew that she was the one for him. Bawang Putih began to sing her beautiful song, and the prince fell in love with her and took her away to the palace, and they lived happily ever after. As for the wicked stepmother and Bawang Merah, they were never heard from again. The end. So that was the story of Bawang Putih and Bawang Merah. Now, the first thing I want to mention is that there are actually two versions of this story. This version of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah, which I've subtitled The Magic Swing, seems to be more popular in Malaysia. And the second version, which is about magic pumpkin, is a bit more well known in Indonesia. I'll tell that version in a few weeks' time, so don't worry. Just be patient for that one. Both versions have the same three core characters. So there's Bawang Putih, Bawang Merah, and the stepmother. Now, as I mentioned before, Bawang Putih means garlic, Putih means white, Bawang is onion, so Bawang Putih is garlic, and Bawang Merah is red shallot. Bawang is onion, Merah is red, so it's a shallot. In most of these stories, Bawang Putih is the good sister and Bawang Merah is the bad sister. But I think I've seen one version where it was the other way around. The way I remember it is Bawang Merah is the bad sister because it's an onion, and when you cut it, it makes you cry. Perhaps that's why Bawang Merah is the bad sister. Garlic and shallot are, of course, two of the most important ingredients in Southeast Asian cooking. So where does this story originate from? This story can actually be traced as far back as 850 AD from a folktale from China called Xian. I'll tell you the story of Xian next week because it is a fantastic story and it's worth a whole episode on its own. The strength and popularity of the tale from China, Xian, is supported by the fact that this folktale has spread throughout Southeast Asia and has variations in Indonesia. There's a story called Leungli, and Vietnam. There's a story called The Tale of Tam and Kam. The Chinese story shares similar elements to the tale of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah. In fact, it's pretty similar to the story of Cinderella, which we all know. It even includes the famous lost slipper, although in the Chinese story, it's not a glass slipper, it's a golden slipper. Glass slipper, golden slipper, they're equally uncomfortable, right? So join me next week if you want to hear the story of Xian. It is a fantastic tale. This is just my personal opinion, but since this tale existed before 850 AD, I think Cinderella might be Chinese. What do you think? So what is this story about? This story has so many layers to it and there's a lot to say about this tale, but I will talk about the most prominent themes in this story. I've identified 4 that I want to talk to you about. The first is the role of both mothers in their quest to ensure the survival of their offspring. The second theme is, of course, sibling rivalry. The third one is the transformation of the protagonist as she tries to survive. And the fourth one is the presence of magic and enchantment. So let's go through those themes one by one. Firstly, the role of mothers. Difficulties often occur when there's a threat to the biological family unit, such as a death of a parent, remarriage, and in this case, a polygamous marriage. All these issues, these circumstances bring on intense feelings of jealousy, anxiety, and affects the mental well-beings of the wives. So fairy tales from cultures where they practice polygamous marriages reflect the rivalry between the co-wives and the fight for resources over their children's future. Naturally, the instinct to support one's biological offspring is a source of tension in a polygamous marriage. So the biological connection which exists between mother and child does play a central role in the storytelling of its people. It's natural for a mother to invest more time and resources into the upbringing of her own biological child. Looked at from this aspect, we can begin to understand the motivation behind the stepmother's attempt to protect her birth child by eliminating the first wife, and why Bawang Putih's mother comes back from the dead. Bawang Putih's mother returns to life not once, but twice after being brutally murdered in order to protect her own child. As a theme, this idea of maternal protection is something which resonates with children and young people who read the story. It gives an element of hope that however difficult the circumstances that they face, there is always hope for survival. So when children or young people read this story, they gain comfort from the fact that even though Bawang Putih is in a difficult situation, there is this maternal figure who is there to help her. So this gives them an element of hope. The second theme I want to talk about briefly is this idea of sibling rivalry. This basically follows on from what I've just said. There's not only a fight for survival between the two mothers, but also between the two stepsisters. Bawang Merah is in a good position because her mother has taken active steps to secure their well-being by getting rid of the first wife. As a result, Bawang Merah can afford to be lazy and to boss Bawang Putih around. I'll tell more stories about sibling rivalry in future episodes because there are a lot of stories of fairy tales about rivalry between brothers and sisters. So stay tuned for that one. The third theme I want to talk about is this idea of transformation of the main character, the protagonist. Like most fairy tales, a period of suffering must be endured before the protagonist begins to develop a sense of agency or control over her actions. In other words, she goes through a transformation or a metamorphosis brought about by her mistreatment. In Bawang Putih Bawang Merah, the protagonist must face tremendous cruelty at the hands of those who are supposed to take care of her, i.e. her stepmother. At first, Bawang Putih appears to be passive and is simply allowing her stepmother to control her life. This isn't surprising, bearing in mind that at this stage, Bawang Putih is still a young girl and she is living in the stepmother's house. So she's still dependent upon her guardian. However, even in such circumstances, Bawang Putih bears her life with grace and displays such qualities as modesty, diligence, industriousness, honesty, and humility. It is these qualities which allow her to prove her worth. As the story progresses, we can see that through the love and support of her mother, first in the form of the fish and then subsequently in the form of the tree, Bawang Putih begins to build up her courage, her self-confidence, and even when the fish is killed, she does not lose hope, but instead she takes active steps to find a way to escape her abusive family. Happiness is achieved through the gaining of independence, misadventure survived, and wicked step-parent defeated. The final theme that runs through this story and through a lot of these kind of fairy tales is the presence of magic and enchantment. There is a magical helper or some spiritual thing that helps the protagonist. Now, the rebirth of Bawang Putih's mother as a fish and then subsequently as a tree facilitates this transformation in the character of Bawang Putih. So the two themes of maternal protection and magic combine to enable our protagonist to achieve her happily ever after. This isn't a new theme, of course, and there are many fairy tales from around the world about a mother protecting her child using magic. Examples are the Grimm brothers' version of Cinderella, Aschenputtel, a tale that was written 100 years after Perrault's classic story, Cendrillon. Cendrillon is an early version of Cinderella. So in this original Cinderella story, a girl plants a twig on the grave of her mother, which grows into a hazel tree, much like the story of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah. When she is forbidden to go to the ball by her stepmother, the tree provides her with a golden gown and gold shoes. So unlike the modern Disney Cinderella, there is no magical godmother, no wand or talking animals which transform into footmen and horses. There's only the spirit of Cinderella's dead mother which flows through the tree and helps her attain her goals. So actually the earlier Cinderella stories, before Grimm's and before Disney got to it, they focus on the spirit of the mother in the form of the tree. So it's interesting that this is very similar to the story of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah, and it is also very similar to the story of Xian, which I will tell you next week. During the course of my research, I found a story from the Bidayuh people of Sarawak called the honey tree. This story also utilizes the same motive of a reincarnated tree which protects the child protagonist. This is a wonderful story, and I will of course tell you the tale of the honey tree in a few weeks' time. So I hope you'll join me for that one as well. So what did you think of the story of Bawang Putih Bawang Merah? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please do leave a comment. If you like this video and my other videos, please do like and subscribe to my channel. It will really help motivate me to make more videos like this, and it will also help push this video to others out there. Thank you for listening to today's episode, but don't go just yet. You can check out my episode on the magical healing powers of fairy tales, episode 17, which I've linked down below. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode where I will tell you the exciting tale of Xian.